Well, please have open before you 1 Samuel in chapter 15. I mentioned this morning that when I preach, I'm going to be calling us to learn some lessons from the life of David. However, tonight we're going to be learning a lesson from King Saul in order to sort of set the scene for how David arrives and takes his place as Saul's replacement. And the title I've given the message tonight is When Good Enough is Not Good Enough. Now, I don't know what you're like at DIY. I know what I'm like, and it's not very good. And some of us may be perfectionists, and we may be very adept at these sort of things. I can certainly think of one person who springs to mind, possibly two. But there's probably more out there. Whereas some of us may be less enthusiastic, less able when it comes to these things. So, I don't know, maybe you're building flat pack furniture, or you're putting up shelving, or even at work, you've been asked to do a project by your employer, and you reach the end of the process, and you look at what you've done, and you see it's not exactly perfect, and then you conclude, well, that's just going to have to do. It's just going to have to do. It's not what it should be, but it's good enough. Well, for King Saul, he seemed to find himself in this position all too frequently. And to learn lessons from the life of David, as I've said, we need to learn a lesson from his predecessor, King Saul, and that will help us to put David's life and experience into context. Now, the episode we're going to consider tonight should really come with something of a health warning. As we were reading through that passage, probably a couple of things really stood out and probably stung. And as you're listening to it being read, as you're reading it yourselves, you're thinking, oh, this is really heavy stuff. And it's in the Bible. And some of what we read is surprising, isn't it? And upsetting even. So it does come with a bit of a health warning. We are going to consider issues that are very serious, highly controversial, but they are issues that we shouldn't shy away from. And we'll consider them as we face them. It's in the Word of God. And that means we have to grapple and wrestle with some of these things that we find particularly difficult. Well, a brief history of Saul, very brief. God had, through the prophet Samuel, anointed Saul as the king of Israel. Now, as we were thinking on Tuesday, when Stuart was here, God was their king, wasn't he? God was the king of Israel. But they wanted a king just like all the nations had around them. A human king, one they could see, one they could sort of honour, show respect to. But it was a terrible indictment on them, wasn't it? They'd rejected God, and in return, God gave them Saul. Now, Saul is described in 1 Samuel 9 verse 2 as handsome a young man as could be found anywhere in Israel. And he was a head taller than anyone else. So Saul was literally head and shoulders above the rest. Very impressive looking individual. And would have fit the bill. If you wanted an impressive looking chap, big, strong looking, handsome, someone who represents the kingdom, well, Saul would have ticked a lot of boxes, but perhaps not the most important one. Now, by the time we reach chapter 13 of 1 Samuel, Saul has already sinned against the Lord by unlawfully performing the role of priest when he thought Samuel wasn't going to turn up at Gilgal where Samuel had said he would meet him. And you're probably familiar with that passage. Saul is waiting and waiting. He was told it was going to be 7 days. And he waits and waits and waits until he can wait no more. And he decides to take matters into his own hands. And as soon as he does that, who turns up? Samuel. Saul felt pressure from the people, didn't he? He felt that pressure. He couldn't cope with it. And he caved in. And it's following that incident that God rejects Saul as king, though he's yet to announce it to Saul, and identifies his replacement. Samuel rebukes Saul, saying in chapter 13, verse 13, "You have done a foolish thing," Samuel said. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command." So we've got 5 headings, and the first is this: Saul's commission. Saul's commission. So as we arrive in chapter 15, Saul has presented to him a brand new opportunity to prove himself, a second chance to demonstrate his ability to be faithful and obedient to the Lord. And this time it would be by wielding the sword of God's judgment. Chapter 15, verse 1. Samuel said to Saul, "I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel. So listen now to the message from the Lord." This is coming directly from God. "This is what the Lord Almighty says. I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys." It's quite a commission, isn't it? And there's really no way to repackage this to make it palatable to the modern era. And we need to be clear. God was commanding Saul and his armies to commit a genocide of the Amalekites. A genocide is defined as the deliberate and systematic killing or persecution of a large number of people from a particular national or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group. Disturbing, perhaps. Now, the question we must ask is why? Why would God command such a thing? The Bible makes it clear that the Amalekites were a constant national security threat to the Israelites. Their policy was to attack and destroy Israel at every opportunity. Imagine you live in Three Cross and a barbaric tribe from West Moors were constantly attacking you, killing your people, women as they walked alone, children on their way home from school. Generation after generation of Westmorians treated you as their constant target. If that were true, that would be awful, wouldn't it? You'd never feel safe. You'd always feel under attack, always felt at risk of one of your loved ones, one of your community, being struck down, the weakest of them, the most vulnerable of them, with an enemy that was constantly vigilant to make the most of those deadly opportunities. So Israel had to live under the constant threat of attack and annihilation from this marauding, violent tribe who first attacked them for no reason whatsoever when Israel left the tyranny of Egypt. Generation after generation of Amalekites would rise up as Israel's enemy, actively, proactively seeking their destruction. Now, do you remember when Moses had to keep his arms lifted during a battle to prevent Israel being defeated? And he had to have help to hold his arms up. Who was that battle with? The Amalekites. Okay, so then we must ask another question. Is genocide ever justified? I bet you never thought you'd hear that question in church. But it is a serious issue, and it's a current issue, and one of the most articulate atheists around today uses this very text to justify his unbelief. And he runs rings around some Christian apologists who really want to close their eyes and pretend it isn't in the Bible. I wish they never had to address the issue. So what is the answer? Is genocide ever justified? Well, the answer is a surprising yes, but only in very specific circumstances and for a specific purpose, neither of which are applicable today. The fact that God commanded this genocide then does not justify any other genocide ever. And I'll explain why. Now, if your answer to the question, is genocide ever justified? No, it's never justified under any circumstances, then you stand in direct contradiction to God. Do you remember how God commissioned Saul? I will do this to the Amalekites. It was God's action, wasn't it? So it may be helpful to approach the situation in this way. Who has the right to take life? God. That's the correct answer. So our next question should be, in what circumstances is God entitled to take life? And the answer is, as an act of judgment against sin, isn't it? It's not just random. God just doesn't take life because he takes pleasure in doing so. It is an act of judgment against sin. I'll remind you of some very famous examples. Genesis 2:16. And the Lord God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. Now, God's not saying the fruit was poisoned, physically, literally, but death would follow their disobedience. Who was going to carry out that verdict? God. Genesis 6. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight and was full of violence. God saw how corrupt the earth had become, for all the people on earth had corrupted their ways. So God said to Noah, I am going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth. Devastating. An act of God's judgment upon sin, where the entire world apart from 8 people on board a boat, were going to be completely wiped out by God as an act of judgment. Romans 6 verse 23, for the wages of sin is death. Who pays that wage? God. God gives death to sinners as their wages. And if anyone thinks that this is a God of the Old Testament thing, as if by the time the New Testament comes along, God had fundamentally changed his character, we need to remember that it is Jesus Christ who will judge the living and the dead at his appearing, and at his word the unbelieving will be cast into the lake of fire. And as I say, it's no good trying to shy away from this issue, which some people do by saying, well, that's just the mean God of the Old Testament. That's not my Jesus. Because that's just simply heresy. Look at the words behind me. I am the Lord. I change not. God never changes. He is a God of holiness. He is a God of justice. And he must and will always, without exception, punish sin. So then we ask another question. Does God ever delegate his authority to take life? The answer again is yes. Think of the 36 capital offences in the Old Testament. The death sentence. Who had the authority to carry out that sentence? The Jewish authorities, in line with their God-ordained criminal justice system, which God gave them. Who has the ultimate right to take life as a punishment for sin? God. Does he delegate that responsibility? Yes, he delegated it to the authorities in Israel. And it's not just an Old Testament thing. Look at, well, don't turn to it, but I'll read Romans 13. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. The sword. They are God's servants, agents of wrath, to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. It's very clear, isn't it? Very strong, but very clear. So in the case of the Amalekites, God was wielding his sword of justice via the hands of Saul and his armies. This was an act of divine judgment, of divine justice. The website Got Questions says this: the Amalekites' unrelenting brutality towards the Israelites began with an attack at Rephidim, Exodus 17. This is recounted in Deuteronomy 25. With this admonition, remember what the Amalekites did to you along the way when you came out of Egypt, when you were weary and worn out. They met you on your journey and attacked all who were lagging behind, typically women and children. They had no fear of God. When the Lord your God gives you rest from all the enemies round you in the land he is giving you to possess as an inheritance, you shall blot out the name of Amalek from under heaven. Do not forget. This is an act of God's justice. Hebrews 10. If we deliberately keep on sinning after we've received the knowledge of the truth, no sacrifice for sins is left, but only a fearful expectation of judgment and of raging fire that will consume the enemies of God. Anyone who rejected the law of Moses died without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much more severely do you think someone deserves to be punished who has trampled the Son of God underfoot, who has treated as an unholy thing the blood of the covenant that sanctified them, and who has insulted the Spirit of grace? For we know him who said, "It is mine to avenge. I will repay." And again, the Lord will judge his people. It is a dreadful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. That, I hope, puts into perspective Saul's commission to destroy the Amalekites. Now, I know this is an extremely difficult issue to wrestle with. It is. But we must never condemn God by siding with those who hold unbiblical ideas about his character and who deny his absolute right to hold sinners accountable fully for their actions by executing his justice. Now, our fundamental discomfort around God's acts of judgment, even the very existence of hell, when we think about it, comes down to the fact that we have a very low view of sin and its offensiveness to God. Once we understand who God is, the holiness of his character, we need to have a right view of sin. And that would prompt questions like this. Why does God allow any of us to live? Why does he delay executing his justice on a world of sin? Why does he spare my life? Why does he offer me salvation? That's the right perspective. So Saul had a very clear commission. Secondly, and these other points are a lot briefer, Saul's compromise. Verse 4, so Saul surrounded the men and mustered them at Telaim, 200,000 foot soldiers and 10,000 from Judah. Saul went to the city of Amalek and set an ambush in the ravine. Then he said to the Kenites, "Go away, leave the Amalekites so that I do not destroy you along with them, for you showed kindness to all the Israelites when they came up out of Egypt." So the Kenites moved away from the Amalekites. He gives the Kenites warning, doesn't he? And Saul started well here, didn't he? This was looking positive, rising to the challenge, executing some righteous judgment here. He paid attention to detail. He remembered how Abraham approached God and pleaded with him, "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked?" When he was sharing with Abraham his plan to destroy Sodom, another example of God's outpoured judgment. And we need to be clear, God only ever condemns the guilty. And the Bible makes it clear that we're all guilty. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. Therefore, we all deserve his judgment. Now, unfortunately, Saul paid less attention to detail as the campaign progressed. Verse 7. Then Saul attacked the Amalekites all the way from Havilah to Shur, near the eastern border of Egypt. He took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive, and all his people he totally destroyed with the sword. But Saul and the army spared Agag, the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lambs, everything that was good. These they were unwilling to destroy completely. But everything that was despised and weak, they totally destroyed. Saul chose compromise over obedience and somehow expected no one to notice, not even the all-seeing, all-knowing God. So this led, of course, to point number 3, Saul's rejection. Unfortunately for Saul, God was paying very close attention. Verse 10, "Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel, I regret that I have made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions." Samuel was angry, and he cried out to the Lord all that night. Early in the morning, Samuel got up and went to meet Saul, but he was told, "Saul has gone to Carmel." Interestingly, there he has set up a monument in whose honour? His own honour, and has turned and gone on down to Gilgal. Look at Saul's disingenuous attempt to cover up his sin. Verse 13, when Samuel reached him, Saul has the audacity to say, "The Lord bless you. I have carried out the Lord's instructions." Saul. The evidence literally speaks for itself when Samuel calls on the most unlikely witnesses for the prosecution. Verse 14. But Samuel said, "What then is this bleating of sheep in my ears? What is this lowing of cattle that I hear? I shouldn't hear any of those noises, Saul." They're crying out against you, that you have rebelled against the Lord. But like Eve blaming Adam for eating the forbidden fruit, Saul seeks to deflect from his failure to obey by blaming the military and then claiming it was all for a good cause. Verse 15, Saul answered, "The soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and cattle, for such a good cause, to sacrifice to the Lord your God. But we totally destroyed the rest." In other words, oh, come on, Samuel. We put in a good effort, a decent shift. Think about it. The things we did destroy, well, they couldn't have been more destroyed if we tried. "Enough," Samuel said to Saul, verse 16. "Let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night." Not sure how enthusiastically Saul then replies, "Tell me." Verse 17, Samuel said, "Although you were once small in your own eyes," and he was, wasn't he? The last thing he wanted, actually, was to be king. Now, after 2 very dramatic acts of disobedience and setting up a monument in his own name, all that humility has disappeared. "You were once small in your own eyes. Did you not become the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel. You were the Lord's anointed. And he sent you on a mission, saying, 'Go and completely destroy those wicked people, the Amalekites. Wage war against them until you have wiped them out.'" Now, Saul didn't have any objection to this on sort of moral grounds. I think he was quite happy to wipe out the defenseless, the weak. That wasn't the issue. Why did you not obey the Lord? Why did you pounce on the plunder? That's what it was. And do evil in the eyes of the Lord. And even when God's prophet confronts him with the facts, Saul persists in his self-righteous assessment of his incomplete mission. Verse 20, "But I did obey the Lord." He's still fighting his corner against the Lord. "I went on the mission the Lord assigned me. I completely destroyed the Amalekites," and, to contradict himself entirely, brought back Agag their king. But why did you do that? "The soldiers took sheep and cattle from the plunder, the best of what was devoted to God." You see, I had a very high and noble cause behind all this, in order to sacrifice them to the Lord your God at Gilgal. You see, Samuel, we were thinking about God the whole time. But, verse 22, Samuel replied, "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Samuel puts his finger on the fundamental issue at hand. That however grand the display, however seemingly impressive the sacrifice, incomplete obedience is in fact disobedience. And it's only at this point that Saul confesses his failure. Verse 24, then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned. I violated the Lord's command and your instructions. I was afraid of the men again, and so I gave in to them. Second time running. Now I beg you, forgive my sin, come back with me so that I may worship the Lord. But Samuel said to him, I will not go back with you. You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you as king over Israel. Which leads us to point 4, Saul's replacement. Now, seeing the crown slipping away from him, Saul grasps at it. Verse 27, as Samuel turned to leave, Saul caught hold of the hem of his robe, and it tore. Samuel said to him, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to one of your neighbours, to one better than you. That must have stung. He who is the glory of Israel does not lie or change his mind. For he is not a human being that he should change his mind. It's too late, Saul. It's over. Your heart wasn't in it. And the throne will pass to one whose heart beats in tune with God's. Eager to save face, Saul has one last request of Samuel. Verse 30. Saul replied, I have sinned, but please honour me before the elders of my people and before Israel. Still interested in holding on to some sort of honour from the others, dignity, when he's been publicly disobedient to the Lord. Come back with me so that I may worship the Lord your God. It doesn't say the Lord my God, the Lord your God. So Samuel went back with Saul, and Saul worshipped the Lord. And then before Samuel leaves Saul for the very last time, Samuel publicly puts right what Saul had left undone. Verse 32, then Samuel said, bring me Agag, king of the Amalekites. Agag came to him in chains, and he thought, surely the bitterness of death is past. But as long as sin lives, it defies God. Agag thought he had been spared, possibly, if he managed to get away, to pursue his hostilities again, given half the chance. But, verse 33, Samuel said, as your sword has made women childless, that again helps put it into perspective, doesn't it? This is what the Amalekites were doing, attacking the children, the babies of the Israelites. As your sword has made women childless, so will your mother be childless among women. And Samuel put Agag to death before the Lord at Gilgal. In other translations, he hacked Agag to death. A very public demonstration of this is the level of obedience that you should have achieved, Saul. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life. Verse 34, then Samuel left for Ramah, but Saul went up to his home in Gibeah of Saul. Until the day Samuel died, he did not go to see Saul again. Though Samuel mourned for him, and the Lord regretted that he had made Saul king over Israel. So briefly, point number 5, lessons that we can learn from Saul. Number 1, fulfill your commission. Fulfill your commission. It's one thing to know what we have been called to, holiness, devotion to Christ, evangelism, commitment to church life. It's another to fulfill that commission wholeheartedly, isn't it? Number 2, never compromise for the sake of popularity. Saul caved in under pressure and chose praise from the world rather than from God. Now, do we change what we believe about God or about moral issues, things like abortion, sexuality, gender, and so on, because we want to be thought well of by the world rather than being faithful to the Lord and his word? Because that's a very real pressure, and many cave in to it. Thirdly, have a high view of God and fully recognize the sinfulness of sin. See sin as God sees sin, and not as the world sees it, or even how we'd prefer to see it. We trivialize sin when God is angry with the wicked every day. Fourthly, don't forfeit your usefulness in God's service by offering half-hearted obedience. We mustn't kid ourselves that God is satisfied with superficial obedience. He's not. He never has been, has he? Saul lost the kingdom when he tried to hide his disobedience behind grand religious displays of sacrifice. What a brilliant smokescreen for hypocrisy. Look at the scale of the sacrifice. Look at the sheep, the cattle that we're going to sacrifice to the Lord. Wonderful, isn't it, Samuel? Not in the eyes of God. To obey is better than sacrifice. Remember Ananias and Sapphira in the New Testament. A great display of their generosity. But they lied about it. They tried to big themselves up in front of others to show the greatness of their sacrifice. And what did the Lord do in the New Testament? Took their lives. In fact, many people wouldn't join the church following that because they were afraid of the holiness of God. And then lastly, stop trying to be king of your own life. Israel's issues under Saul started when they rejected God as king. We need to surrender to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ, the one who truly, in every way, exemplified obedience to God, didn't he? Not my will, but thy will be done, he said. And he obeyed that will to the point of death on a cross to pay the ultimate price for our disobedience, so that through his death and through faith in him, we might live.